Planning Committee meeting, December 16th. We will, I think, probably spend some time tonight going over some ideas. I'm going to be trying to frame it in a way that everyone can participate and contribute and give us your ideas and thoughts. With that, it's just slightly after 6 o'clock. We'll begin the meeting. As always, the first item on the agenda is from Lauren. I hope that the thing I see on her leg is part of the icebreaker. I don't know.
Do you want it to be? It could be.
As they say in the theater, break a leg or something like that.
I've been trying to think of an icebreaker question for the last 5 minutes, and I was going to ask if you've ever been injured before and what happened, but I feel like that's kind of negative. So we're going to go with, what is a holiday tradition that you have around this time of year? Or you can answer the injury question if you want. You can choose.
Getting injured.
So holiday tradition or an injury you've had in your life.
Okay.
All right.
Where should we start? Kelly? We start. You want to start on this end? I think she's pointing to you, Bruce. You want to start?
All right, I'll start with an injury. About 4 years ago, I would say, the first day of skiing of the year when Sunday River opened, we had had a huge dumping of snow, and I have never skied that early ever. I usually wait till after the holidays. And I went with my daughter, and we were a whole bunch of us that were skiing together. And coming down the first run, and there was a place where they had some man-made snow, and they didn't mark it off. And the guy ahead of me was standing by my daughter, and he said, somebody's going to hit that spot right there, and they're going to buy it. And sure enough, I did, and I bought it, and I broke my hand. So that was that for that ski season.
My quick related response would be that my most inauspicious injury was that I got in a fight about 13 years old, junior high. Actually won this fight, and but I was the one who came to school the next day with a broken hand. So it wasn't much of...
I wouldn't have pegged you for that, but baking cookies.
I played rugby in college, and I got alternating black eyes on the weekends, but nothing major on the field. But late in one season, I went in the locker room, and we had these huge, heavy wood oak benches, and I busted my big toe when the bench fell on it.
Well, I can sympathize with Lauren because the very last day of 7th grade was a half day, and we were playing baseball in the afternoon, and I blew my knee out, and I spent the whole summer on crutches.
Thank you. I had an interesting adventure when I was a young man. My brother, who's 18 months younger than I am, tried to kill me. We were at a stoplight where he was about 3, I was about 4. My mother was driving the car. This was way before, as you would imagine, seat belts or any of that kind of safety stuff. So my brother decided to open the passenger door in the front seat. Noticing and being ready to help, I leaned over quickly to get it, and somehow I fell out of the car. That's why I say he pushed me out of the car. My mother, not noticing me falling out of the car, took off as the light changed and ran over me. Fortunately, it was only on my lower extremities, and other than tread marks on my body, the doctor said I would survive, and here I am all these years later.
That's crazy.
let's see. In high school, I played football, and there was a time when I was playing special teams. We were covering a kickoff, and somehow everybody's helmet ended up hitting my wrist at the same time, and I got squished. And at the time, it was handy because I worked at Shaw's bagging groceries, and I would stick that whole cast right in the bag and just throw cans at it. And it worked really well. So I didn't get to play football anymore, but that was all right.
Many injuries from being athletic and mountain biking and all of that, but the one best one was they were very familiar with me at the University of Utah Hospital from mountain biking behind them. And one particular one was just coming down something steep over the handlebars, landed on all fours, bounced up again, then landed on my head, broke the helmet. The helmet worked, so I was fine, but I ended up walking with my bike over my shoulder to the hospital and saying, "Check me out, please."
I can't top that one, but I've been fortunate to, I've never broken any bones, but I've had plenty of stitches, and probably my mom's favorite was when I was 6 years old. I was on the top of a station wagon with my friend. We were washing his parents' car, and I slipped off, hit my chin on the pavement. So I didn't know it. I couldn't feel it, but I guess I looked pretty ugly.
Conscious this is a 2-hour meeting and the statute of limitations may not have run on some of my injuries, I'm going to avoid that question and say that I'm responsible for roasting the turkey.
Yeah, I don't have anything like any of these guys' tales of injuries. So Santa Claus in Auburn exists, unlike Lewiston, and our tradition is that we leave beer and carrots for Santa and the reindeer. And the beer is always gone in the morning, so obviously Santa Claus exists.
I'm going to two-part this. Just getting together with family. But the injury, so I was a serial vacation ender of my parents. And the most memorable one was I was playing soccer and I broke my leg rather spectacularly in a soccer injury. So, and that canceled their ski vacation to Vail and Beaver Creek. So
I have both broken bone and stitches stories. And as a youngster, I had an interesting relationship with my chin, which I tumbled out of the high chair, fell while roller skating, off my bike multiple times, stitches every single time on the chin, and still have the scars to prove it.
Let's see, when I was officer friendly, I had a second grader that was a bit of out of control, took off from Sherwood Heights, and I went chasing after him after he had destroyed a classroom. And as I was chasing, I fell and broke my arm on a second grader. So we both landed okay, but my arm was broken. So.
We go to, I'm going to stick with the tradition. I'll go with that route. My entire family, a very large family, all of the kids, Christmas Eve every year, we get together. It is utter chaos. I love every minute of it. Paper flying everywhere. Kids are happy. It's a great tradition. I hope it never changes.
I fractured my hip and pelvis riding my bike. Actually, I was hit by a school bus. I'm okay. The school bus is not. So now I have a bionic hip. So
It's cool. I really like looking at the Christmas lights. I think they're beautiful. And I tore my meniscus.
I have no good injury stories, so I will stick with the traditions. I love to bake, so I'm really looking forward to also baking cookies and making chocolates with my kids.
I guess for those of you who I haven't talked to about this, I was a goalie on my college soccer team, and I broke my scaphoid bone, and it just never healed correctly. And over the course of like 4 or 5 surgeries, I had 4 bones in my hand removed. So one of my hands is 4 bones shorter than the other one. It's true. I'm sorry? Did you hit the post? No, it was on a breakaway. She just shot the ball right into my hand, and my wrist snapped. Yeah.
Good, well,
That was really fun, everyone.
we've all had exciting lives. Next item is to just take a roll call for the record. Kelly, we'll start with you.
Kelly Butler.
Matthew Duval.
Jane Coslow.
Adam Lee.
Tim Cowan.
Paul Jacques.
Dana Staples.
John Cleveland.
Jeff Harmon.
Rick Whiting.
Dennis Bergeron.
Rex Rhodes.
Bruce Ryu.
Allie Toby.
Carrie Willett. Lauren Cafe.
Sam Pikus.
Dennis Dote.
Phil Kroll.
And Becky notified me that she's apologizes, but she had a conflict with another meeting tonight, so unable to make it. You all had a copy of our last meeting minutes. You looked at them. Are there any changes or additions to the minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand. The minutes are adopted. And this is a section where we have an opportunity for public comment, so I will open it to public comment. If anybody would like to share their thoughts or comments with us in regards to the comprehensive plan, please come up to the podium and state your name and address.
Hello, I'm Carl Wilcox, and I live about 100 yards in Minot over the Auburn line. Auburn's not or Lewiston for that matter, is not a very bicycle-friendly town. Unfortunately, it's geography of Court Street Hill. And the rotary out here, which I went onto the DOT website, sees shockingly 32,000 cars a day, which makes it busier than many roads going into Portland. So it isn't very friendly if you're going to go from the west. I can't really speak about the east side, since I only live on the west side. That the railroad that I noticed that the City of Auburn owns up to Route 100, I don't know exactly where the ownership changes to the Lewiston-Auburn Railroad, but to me that would be nice if that was a walking and bicycle path. And then when it comes to Savage, in my opinion, you could put up a chain link fence, and maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I really don't know if there's enough space back behind Hammond, or if you get an easement, and you could tie into Poland Road. And that way those people over on Poland Road in that whole neighborhood could make it all the way into downtown Lewiston without having to go on a highly trafficked. For instance, I think Minot Avenue's 13,000 cars a day. And you could continue that, the Lewiston or Auburn Railroad, which is my understanding, the cities both jointly own it. It doesn't seem to get used much. There's 2 tracks there. And usually those railroads are 99-foot right away, at least that's my familiarity. And you could go all the way out to Lewiston Junction. From there, it's 2.4 miles to Rang Pond. So people could bike from downtown Lewiston, with the exception of that 2.4 miles on Lewiston Junction Road, which is not terribly trafficked. You could go all the way to Rang Pond, and I could continue on from there. But it's basically a wall of impenetrability between the Rotary and the Court Street Hill. Thank you for consideration of that.
Thank you for bringing up that. Certainly bicycling and pedestrian and trails have been a consistent part of our discussions. And in some of those areas, there's some plans to increase the trails in connectivity. So definitely, it's on our radar.
Thank you.
Carl, you might want to go to the city's YouTube site and look at last night's city council meeting. There was an update about the trail extension that the city's funding that will go from Bonnie Park along the north side of the Little Androscoggin down by Washington Street towards Brickyard Circle. And then there's a planned connector from there to Poland Road. And if you look at the packet from last night, there's some maps in there, and then there's a presentation that you might
Okay,
be
I was not
interested.
aware of that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment section and continue to item number 5, subcommittee reports and committee discussion. I'll bring you up to date where we have. The 2 subcommittees have met and completed work, did a great job in completing the policies and action items. And some were sent in by email. The next step was, I think we had mentioned that the city staff, Phil and Dennis and the leadership team met yesterday, took a look at the comments and took a look at the actions that we produced. I think there were over 20 people. It was very impressive. They broke into 4 groups here in this area, and they went through those action items, reviewed them, and I acted sort of as a person who just was going between the 4 groups, and I can say there were very thoughtful comments on there, very insightful, very useful, a lot of positive energy I felt to review it, and I think having that input is going to be helpful for us. The next steps will be to take that information, and between Lauren and our consultants, they're going to assimilate those into that document. We're going to get that back to all of you, the subcommittees. A little bit later on, we're going to be talking about couple of possible dates from the subcommittee so that you can review that work that was done as well, as we're getting closer to completing that section of the comp plan. If any member wanted to comment on the subcommittee meetings, certainly I'd open it up and have you comment on the subcommittee. I thought they were useful. By the way, since I had to read them all, I counted them. There were 270 action items. Quite an impressive list to do that. Yeah, Ally or Lauren, do you have comments on the subcommittees process?
No, nothing to add. Just thank you all for the time that you've put into this over the last month. We appreciate it, and it certainly helped move this process along.
Yeah, I can add a quick comment about the meeting yesterday. It lasted 2 hours, and as John said, there were probably between 20 and 30 city staff there, and it was a really good discussion. They went line by line, item by action item, looked at the wording, looked at the realities of their situations, brought in new ideas and things like that, and added really good comments to the work that you guys are doing. So thank you for inviting city staff into this process, and so hopefully it'll continue to be a back and forth between the committee and city staff. So yeah, you'll see those comments in January.
And of course, the hope is that by having administrative staff whose charge is every day to provide municipal services and to move the city forward, it's very useful to have their comment, and they have insights from having to do this work every day. So the goal here is to have those action items be as clear and concise and directive, both for future policymakers that are elected, but also for the staff, so that this is going to become a document that's used by the community for over the next 10 years. So I was very pleased with progress that we made. Jeff.
So I have a question on the process. I've been asked by 3 separate city committees, homelessness, ag working group, and Parks and Rec, if someplace in this process, are we going to engage them to get feedback from these content area committees?
Yes, we will. And thank you for mentioning that again. Making myself a note. Yeah, we'll be looking for some time, most likely in January, to get feedback from those content groups. So I think that brings us to the future land use map. You all received those as some paper copies of some people like to look at visually. So we provided those at that house, but of course, you all received the electronic copies with the overlays. Ally there has the map digitally up there. So the objective this evening will be to, after you've reviewed them before the meeting, to see if there's some adjustments that merit making some changes in the boundaries. It seems to make some sense to start with the high-density, high-growth area, which is in the red, in that area. I thought the process that might work in a coordinated way, in a structured way, would be to start at the northern end of the high-density areas, and then we'll begin to work downwards, going south to west, and then loop around and come back so that we can cover all those boundary areas to see if there are any adjustments that you might suggest. So if that sounds like a good process for you, let's start at the northern end out Center Street, over by the Lake Auburn area, to see what comments you may have or thoughts you may have in those areas.
And again, just to note with these, as we're thinking about this red area and this red boundary, these are the places that should be support the highest amount of growth in the future, the highest amount of density in the future. Just reorienting us to the red area right here.
Jeff?
I think I know, I think the answer to this is it's been changed, but I just want to verify. So the maps that are printed out here, the high growth area is different from the links we had before, and that's because of the update for water and sewer. So the new printed maps have a more accurate measurement. Is that right?
Yes, so updated the information there. We had an outdated water sewer layer. So what we did was took the sewer line data from Auburn Water Sewer District and highlighted the parcels that are within 200 feet of the sewer lines. And since the draft legislation, draft rulemaking says sewer and water in consideration for these growth and density boundaries, of those parcels that are within 200 feet of sewer that also have water access were added in that purple boundary. So the growth area was updated slightly based on that to add some, ultimately ended up increasing the limited growth area towards the southwestern side of Taylor Pond and then down towards the industrial area on the southern end of the map.
Because, just to make sure I'm clear on that, because in the updated layer you got for water and sewer, none of those parcels in those areas were within 200 feet of water or sewer, right?
Within 200 feet of sewer and have water, yes. So the way that the state statutes are laid out are that parcels within 200 feet with limited exception have to connect to sewer. There's not a requirement to connect to water, but based on the draft rulemaking for LD 1829, it says parcels with water and sewer would be subject to, in-growth areas would be subject to that increased density. So it's parcels within 200 feet of sewer that also have water access to cover that water and sewer.
Okay, so in these large printed maps, there's now areas in the limited growth that are beyond 200 feet of a sewer line but have water.
Yes.
So I think that's fine to work off tonight, but I think the prior discussion that we had was that we were going, there's very few places where there's a significant extension of water or sewer beyond the other one. So before we finalize this, we probably should talk about that more in depth, because originally what we had said was wherever the longest terminus was, water or sewer within 200 feet of that. But I think this is fine tonight, but we probably want to think about that and perhaps look a little more in those areas that we've now excluded, how far away we are.
Yeah, I think even more refinement after this meeting will take place when we look at more granular detail. And I think the extension is to the lot, so some of the lots may be fairly large, so actually it gets to the lot, but the lot's large, so it goes way to the back of the lot, so it spreads out that extension area. Okay, so it's not necessarily 200 feet from the actual water or sewer pipe. It's to the 200 feet to where it intersects with the lot, I think.
Parcels within 200.
The parcels, yeah. No comments on particular changes there?
Well, John?
Yes, Matt.
I just have a question. I guess I'm a little bit further south and west, but I was looking around Mount Appetite, and it looks like the guard land it's got water and sewer, but I'm not sure it should be in a high growth area. Like, I just don't know.
I'm sorry, what area were you referring to? I didn't catch it.
Right along Garfield Road at the entry to the guard station there.
Yeah.
That property has water and sewer. I don't know whether it's free for us to designate, because it's owned by the National Guard, not by us.
Yeah, Jeff, maybe you could point that out on the map.
Yeah, so I think this is a little bit of a broader question, because I mark that up as well as areas that, because of water sewer, we show in our first attempt at this in the high growth, high density, but are also in AGRP. And that would be one of them, but there's 3 and maybe 4, depending upon the change in the map, on the southeast side of Lake Auburn. So I think fundamentally one of the questions I think we should answer is, what are we doing about that, where we have an overlap where it's currently in AGRP, but it also is within the distance of water and sewer. And I agree with Matt. I have that same one marked on my notes.
So
So on the map that they have here, you can see, just make sure the layers you have up, the hatch line is AGRP, right? And the red is, so if you look, Ally's pointing them out, the same thing I mapped. So we've excluded Lake Auburn watershed, which is in the blue, but you can see there's this long strip right where her cursor starts, and then if you look over to the left, there's a couple pieces that are currently AGRP, but the parcels, like one of them there is a cemetery. And so I think the question, because it'll apply to a number of places, is if it's in AGRP but fell into the red because of the water or sewer, are we including or excluding that?
That's a question for the committee to talk about.
Yeah, well, so that we're thinking about here, this is high-density, high-growth area. And I think the question before us, even though they may be near the lake within the overlay district, some water and sewer, does that still mean that that area that gets closer to the lake should be designated for high growth, high density? There's some, we have to be mindful of what would be the future impact, I think, on the water source.
So just to clarify with Ally, I believe on the current maps that we have in front of us, whether there's water or sewer or not, the boundary of the Lake Auburn Watershed Overlay District has been excluded, which is the blue. So I think right now we've already accounted for the overlay district and said because there are some short runs of water and sewer in that area, but we've eliminated those. So these places like where Ally has the cursor now are outside the overlay district, but they're currently AGRP, but fell within the red because of the measurement from the water and sewer. And maybe we can zoom in a little so people can get an idea where that is. And because I think we need to decide, whether that's in or out as a group.
Well, are you looking more towards the boundary area or in the middle of it there?
Right. So move your cursor just a little. Right there, those hash lines there to the left of that, and a long skinny one that goes up right there. Those are currently ag zones.
Yeah, and
They now fall into the red.
there's a little bit up off Stetson Road too, which is kind of bizarre. Which is that weird triangle on the eastern side right there.
No, I'm sorry, Adam?
I think the question the mayor is asking is an important one because it's definitely a concentrated policy area for us, right? It's sort of something that one metric is telling us belongs in high growth, but another metric, being the current application of our zoning, has that as an AGRP zone. So the question is whether or not for the future, obviously a council is going to make this ultimate determination, but whether that's something that belongs in AGRP or is a higher growth area. Am I understanding sort of what you're trying to?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I haven't really looked at it as whether it would be in the, the medium tier or the low growth tier, but just focusing on whether it should be in high growth. We could leave it like it is now, or we could say because it's AGRP, we would exclude it from the high growth zone, and then when we get to the medium density and the low density, we can talk about where that might fall.
Well, I think, would it be helpful if we could just show where that ag area currently is so we can see where it is within that map?
So those red hash marks are the ag zone. Maybe, Al, you could zoom in a little on a couple of these so people can get a good idea of what we're talking about, what's there.
I don't think that area right there is as consequential as the area to the west of it, behind Center Street, that little narrow strip. I feel like the stuff that you were just on, I mean, that's cemeteries and so forth, so I don't know that it really matters one way or the other if it's growth zone. But that piece there is a little bit intriguing. Well, you're not gonna build on a cemetery.
No, but why is that?
I'm intrigued by it because I haven't really noticed it before. And I don't really know why it's ag zone, you know?
Is that not I assume that's the stream watershed, which is actually a really important thing to maintain outside of the growth zone. And there are probably other forms of restriction that would apply there. Isn't that, what's the name, is that?
Bobbin Mill.
Allie, could you turn on the floodplain and see if it
Yeah, so it's flowing right
coincides with
down
that?
into the river.
That would make sense then. Keep that outside of the growth.
So it's currently AGRP because it's floodplain. In that particular piece, it goes along the stream there. So that raises kind of another interesting question that I think that building on what Dana was talking about. Dave Hediger, in an earlier meeting, made, I think, a really important point, which is when you look throughout this proposed zone, there's a number of cemeteries, parks, conserved lands, and David's point was that to him, it made more sense that we didn't try to carve out all these little spots in the growth zone from the high-density, high-growth zone, but that we would treat that from a land use category perspective after we define the growth zone and, say, well, parks and cemeteries would get marked as a land use category. So in that case, if we followed that approach, that little strip would stay in the high growth zone, but we would have a land use category rule about, floodplains or cemeteries or parks or whatever. I think, does that categorize, Lauren? I mean, you were involved in that discussion as well.
Yeah, so it's an interesting discussion when talking about floodplains and density of buildings in a high density, high growth area versus a park or a cemetery, for example. So to Dana's point, you're not going to build on a cemetery, but would you be incentivizing high growth, high density near a floodplain? But, I think I agree with you, Mayor Harmon, about the parks. In the middle of our growth area, high density, high growth, we have little parks. We're not going to make those green because then you don't have a continuous whatever. But floodplains is an interesting discussion. And Allie, go ahead.
Yeah. Allie?
Yep, and just to note as well, regardless of kind of growth designation, things like shoreland zoning will still apply regardless of the growth area. Just the growth doesn't supersede floodplain shoreland zoning requirements for water quality.
Yeah. Jeff?
So I think what you're suggesting is that besides cemetery, parks, conserved lands, things like shoreline zoning and floodplains, for the moment, perhaps we shouldn't be too concerned about whether they're in the high density, and then we can talk about land use categories for cemetery, parks, and conserved lands, or just overall rules about things like shoreline zoning and floodplains. And what does that mean? Because to me, a floodplain, regardless of which of the three zones it's in, may have attendant rules with it about development and what the density should be there.
Yeah, it seems to me that that's a good point. And rather than getting into carving up a bunch of little spots because they have unique use within a overall area that's characterized by either high growth or low growth, that overlay maps, floodplain zones, shoreland zoning, could be some conservation area for particular areas, wetlands could be in some of those areas, that those all get addressed and treated in how you apply your land use ordinances. Except I will note, and I'll talk about it later on, I would generally agree with that because there's lots of cemeteries scattered around. But there is one area that is a cemetery area that's in a high growth area. I won't talk about it this minute, but I'll bring it up, which is adjacent to the agricultural resource protection. So maybe in that section where it butts up against something, we might want to make a change, but we'll talk about it later. Adam?
I think we're all landing on the future land use plan, or future land use map is distinguishable from just sort of like our regular types of environmental or other zoning regulations.
Okay.
I want to be sure, and I think this is probably related as to how other towns and cities have done it. I want to make sure we're not giving sort of like a policy indication that we think it's smart to develop in places like a floodplain or as close to a floodplain as possible by doing that in the land use map. And so is there a good way that we can indicate that that's not what we're suggesting?
Yeah, absolutely. In the narrative, land use category policies, those types of things, we can be
Yeah.
more specific with that as well. I do want to go back to Mayor Harmon's questions so we have a clear answer from the committee. For the areas in the ag zone with water, sewer, does the committee have an overall thought on whether those should remain in the high growth area?
Dana?
Could you just point, are you talking about these pieces right here at the bottom, the cemeteries?
Yeah, we can talk about these pieces here, but I guess more generally as well.
So could you just kind of give us an example of what you're talking about, ag zone with water, sewer?
Yep, so anything that's hatched here that's covered by the red has water and sewer coverage.
Yeah. So I would say in regards to those parcels there, I think it would be probably cleaner to exclude those from the high growth zone just because that one that you just had your cursor over and the one just to the left of it are cemeteries. And I mean, they're right on the edge of the high growth zone, so it doesn't really make sense to leave them there anyway.
Other thoughts on that idea? Yeah, Matt?
I think there's one spot. So if you go back up to the right with your cursor down, there's that little notch right on the right-hand side, just below. That little notch right there that your cursor's over, that's all has water and sewer. That to me doesn't make sense as to why we just make a little notch there.
Well, how about putting the water and soil overlay on it so we can see where that is?
Is that triangle a parcel?
You see where that's snapping?
Is that the North River Road area?
Stetson.
Stetson.
It's Stetson and North River Road. It's that corner. And so the red triangle up above is, I don't know why we're distinguishing that between the purple triangle.
This might be
because it's all ag zone.
I think this is a parcel boundary snapping error, so this whole purple section would be this full parcel.
Got it. That makes sense.
Should be red, yep.
Yeah, well, yeah. And the soil comes up to that parcel area. Is it currently used as agricultural use, you know?
Tree growth.
Tree growth?
I think that's actually where the hospice is, isn't it?
It's just to
Or
the
just-
west of it. Yeah,
Above it.
east of it.
Jeff?
I guess so for that particular one, because it's at the intersection there in Stetson Road, I think we would include that in the high growth zone. You agree with that? Nah.
Yeah, that's what I was, it just made no sense not to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had marked on my markup here of the map of including that in high growth.
Yeah, there is development along Stetson Road and more proposed.
Yeah, right across the street. That was going to be my point, that it's a major, rental housing
Yeah.
development that's been approved by the planning board. I forget the number, 160 maybe? Something like
Yeah.
that.
Bruce, do you have a comment? Is there any objection to putting that little triangle in the high growth area? Because of the developing growth in that area, and it has SOAR near it? I don't see an objection, so why don't we make a note that that triangular area would be included in the high-density development? Tim?
To the broader question of ag zone that has water and sewer, I think there's probably a number of different reasons. I'd be interested to see why, certain areas were ag zone. I imagine there's probably reasons that we've already talked about that would then be disqualifications because of rules, but I didn't know whether or not you guys had identified any sections that you weren't really sure why that was the case. Because in general, if there is no reason other than examples we've talked about, I think I'm in support of keeping it in the high density zone. But I don't know if you need us to be looking at any particular place that, based on your review, there wasn't really a clear explanation like a flood zone.
Yeah.
So I think in the maps that I had marked up, I think there's 3 more areas. There's over by Mount Appetite, that, Matt, we should look at that. There's a piece north of that, and then just above 95 over on the River Road. We should look at all 3 of those and get a sense from the committee whether because currently they're marked in red on this, but the current zoning's ag zone. So we should probably look at those 3 on the map and see what the committee thinks of both those. So maybe,
Sorry to cut you off, Mayor Harmon. Before we shift down to a different section of Auburn, just want to finish up here. If there's any other considerations or changes to the high growth boundary line here that the committee would like to see before we move on.
Yeah, so it's saying, this section along Lake Auburn, for example, is there anything in there that you see modification for in that area before we leave that too far? Okay.
Can I ask a question? I'm
Yes.
still just a tiny bit puzzled, and I want to make sure I'm understanding the process here. So we've got a piece of land that's currently in the ag and resource protection zone, but it would be part of the high growth land use for our purposes. Still, in the future, if somebody said, oh, great, that looks like a good place to develop, they would have to come to the planning board and change and have the zoning changed, correct? Because if they wanted to do something with it other than what's currently allowable under the ag zone. I'm just trying to understand the process.
Yes, so that's right. So it's sort of a...
I'm having a little bit of a contortion to kind of understand.
Yeah. Well,
And,
let me try this. So, there are three general land use categorizations. And high density, medium density. So the comprehensive plan will identify those as areas in the future that would be suitable for each one of those categories. We have an existing set of ordinances, so those existing set of ordinances will stay in place until they're changed. I expect after we get our work done, there will be a need for some other process and group to take a look at what we've done and to see whether there needs to be some modifications in what the zoning is. Because ultimately, at the end, the requirement is that your land use ordinances that you're working with are consistent with what the growth, consistent with the comprehensive plan. And in some cases, when we make these changes, it's going to require re-examining them. So there would be, there would be some need to align it with consistency. Now, there's lots of different types of land use ordinances. Some are more dense than others. So there would needs to be some sort of an alignment in the future. Or there would be a difficulty should anyone object to the change and saying it's not consistent with the comprehensive plan. Kim?
Thanks. Just to clarify so that I'm correctly thinking, what I'm understanding you to say is that these changes would be more proactive and not reactive to someone being interested in developing a section of land in high density that also was restricted, and that the zoning would be done then. It would be much more proactive.
Yes, and that would be the better way to do it, in my view. Trying to have citizens petitions changing little section is difficult, and it's staying with the general concept. So there should be a proactive effort to realign the comprehensive plan map, future land use map, with ordinances that we have to apply. And that would be a group, I guess, would work on that. The planning board would be involved in it. Would come back to the city council ultimately to make changes. Adam?
I think this was my question to Ally, is that we can use the narrative section to clarify that we're not suggesting by including that in the future land use map that we should just eviscerate any other protections.
Yes, for those smaller, unique parcels have particular characteristics to them. And that's a good point, because we really do need to make that clear. Ally?
Just to that point, if there's an area that's zoned ag today and the high growth, and it's put into the high growth, high density area, the zoning there would have to be updated to match the intent of that future land use.
Right.
So does that make sense?
Right.
Jane, so yeah. It would have to you would change. Yeah. Yeah. You would have to change that.
Right. Jeff?
Yeah, and people shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there's an intermediary step here, right? So we're going to work through this and identify the high, medium, and low growth zones. But then the committee will have to identify the land use categories that fit in all of those. Right. So not every place in the high growth zone will be equal. There may be 2, 3, 5, 10, I don't know, however many land use categories that will have some description of the characteristics of what should be in those areas.
Right.
So the future action that John's talking about to align the zoning would not just be looking at, oh, this is the high growth zone, it's all the same. It would look at the high growth zone and then say, well, what zoning would match the land use characteristics that was identified in that zone?
Right. So just for an example, right here in the downtown area, that's going to be much denser, much higher density there, even though it's in the map to be high density. When you get out on the Stetson Road, that's not downtown. The kind of characteristics that would fit that high density are not going to be the same as the characteristics that fit downtown Auburn. And it'll be several gradations of that. Yep.
But your question raises to me again the question of, have we resolved the fundamental question that we started with was, are we okay if something is currently in the red zone that is ag, or do we want to take them out? I mean, that, like, I'm not sure if we've come to consensus on that. So have we come to consensus on
I
that?
think we've come to consensus in that we'll do it spot by spot. So
Okay.
we can't all say, yes, all ag should be high growth or not, because there are different sites that are ag and also there are cemeteries and things. So I think we'll go site by site, and that was the agreement that we came to.
And so
Okay, thank you.
The things that I think tonight that we're looking at are really around the boundary areas, the edges, as opposed to what's in the middle. In the middle, you can, no? If you have a cemetery in the middle of that and it's in a high growth zone, we're not moving those folks. We're gonna let them rest in peace, okay? But we don't have to say, well, that's a little special dot in the middle of the red.
That would take care of it.
Right.
So I think there's three more, and they're throughout the zone, but I think that we should deal with them while we're on this topic.
Okay.
So I think...
Where's the one closest to where we are?
Well, there's none close to where you are, so...
Well,
so Ally's on the next one, which is this little point here. It's sort of southwest of Taylor Pond.
okay, can we, yeah, right, that's a good area to look at, good. So if, I believe we had discussed, maybe it's on your map as well, Jeff, but just south of Taylor Pond, Alderwood Drive, and all of that subdivision, that area, as you can see, south of that is all in the high-density red zone. So I think the question before us, or some of us has looked at, is that an area that should be south of Taylor Pond, be in the high-density zone? And if you take a look at a couple of factors, there is water and sewer there, so that's how it gets in there, because there's both water and sewer. But the other map that shows poorly drained soils, for example, that we were given, that's an area where there's a lot of poorly drained soils in that area and developed. So the question is, what should we do with that area?
So when I mark that up, you can see it on the map here where Ally has it. It's kind of where the yellow bleeds south of the pond in the Taylor Pond watershed. It's south of the pond and up the east side. And I would propose that we exclude those from the high-density, high-growth zone, because the basis of putting water and sewer in there was not for development, it was for pollution control.
Right.
And we should probably exclude that, even though there's water and sewer there, from the high-growth, high-density zone, because we're just going to exacerbate the problem for which they originally ran water and sewer up there.
Anywhere?
Yeah, that was an area I identified, knowing the history. Taylor Pond is very small, pretty shallow. Water quality's been an issue. I know the neighborhood would prefer to see it in not necessarily no growth, but certainly not high growth.
Right.
And even with the restrictions that you have with shoreline zoning, the pond is sort of threatened, so it's safer to leave it in the sort of mid-range for development purposes, I think.
Right, so, a long time ago, Taylor Pond was a rural, distant area where people would go for a drive to go to the beaches, the cottages that are out there. That was like going on a big trip. And so a lot of these little cottages got built over there. And over time, that caused a problem. I remember when we had to the city had to take action, put sewer in there to protect the Taylor Pond. And so that's why sewer's over there. It was a reactive section. The other thing is, if you've been into that area, these are little cottage areas. These are mostly dirt, narrow roads. The water that's out there is seasonal. When the temperature drops, they shut the water off because they're either on the surface or just underneath the surface. So I would say from Hotel Road along that east shore over to the lake, we probably don't want to encourage high density in there. The infrastructure isn't there for it. The reason the water, or particularly the sewer, is to protect the lake quality. Jeff?
Ally, could you turn on two layers? One is the Taylor Pond Overlay District, and the other is the High Growth Zone, because I think that'll show the area to the south of the pond and to the east of the pond that we're talking about that should be excluded.
This cursor is going to be the death of me. See if that's a little easier to see.
Yeah, and you can turn the ag zone off.
So anywhere that around Taylor Pond that's kind of purple right now is currently in the growth area and in the Taylor Pond overlay district. So the question to the committee is, should we take out that purple area from the high growth, high density and make it probably yellow?
I support that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you said take it out and make it what?
Yellow.
Yeah.
So limited, medium growth, medium density.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, we can discuss later on whether it's going to be low or medium. For the purposes of tonight, we'd say we're taking it out of the high growth zone.
So just to clarify, so anything to the west here of Hotel Road, all the way down and over?
Is there a boundary?
And if you only run the Taylor Pond Overlay District and the high growth zone, you can see this really clearly, because you got some other layers. You got the flood zone in there now as well.
So what does the committee think about when drawing this boundary, extending it down to, what's that road right there, Ally? Yeah, so kind of taking that whole polygon right now, that's...
Yeah, down to the Stevens Mills Road, I would think.
Right, Stevens Mills, not hotel, but Stevens.
Right, sorry,
Yes,
Stevens.
Not mine, but rather Stevens Mills.
Yeah. Ally, can you zoom in?
If you're going by roads, I would rather we go by the overlay, the watershed boundary for Taylor Pond, instead of just arbitrarily picking roads where this is, because outside the watershed boundary, it all flows the other way.
I'm thinking for the sake of implementing this high growth, high density area, for us to have clear boundaries along either roads preferably, so that someone's backyard isn't split, so that we don't encounter split zones in the future. That would be, which is why I'm asking, should we just extend it down to the road to cover this, thinking about the development patterns of this neighborhood for the future
We can
as
look
well.
at if we're running into split parcels later. But I think for this purpose, we want to have an articulable reason, because if we just start picking roads, that principle's going to go all through this, and it's going to get very messy. I understand your point about implementation, but I think first we should exclude the Taylor Pond watershed from the high density, and that'll take care of the east side and the south side of the pond. And then once we make all these adjustments, we can go back and look and see if we've got parcels sticking out that make this difficult.
I think when the committee starts to do the land use categories and thinking about the types of areas, that discussion will come up in the sense of this type of neighborhood right now, do we want it to be half high growth, half medium growth? So,
no, I concur with where you're going, Lauren, and mention Stevens Mills because I looked at it. But for the purposes of this, we'll just, if we just use the watershed, then let's come back when we do a little more detail to see where it is at. The watershed, if you drive out there, nobody's going to say they see a watershed line. Doesn't exist. I mean, it exists on a map, but you can't visually see it if driving. Allie?
Yeah, just do want to note, as we start thinking about land use categories, the land uses between kind of both sides of this watershed boundary might be the same. So just as the committee's thinking through this with the new state changes to high density, high growth areas and other areas, that the densities that would be allowed between these two areas would be different. Just as we're thinking about land use categories and refining this in the future, just something for the committee to think about it, kind of the neighborhood scale instead of maybe a parcel by parcel scale.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, I think in that particular area, it's pretty much built out. I don't think that you're really going to see a lot of development there unless you knock some stuff down. I mean, I think if you go straight down Stevens Mills and up Hotel Road, you're like what Jeff said. I mean, you pretty much have your boundary.
So we can table that for now, that discussion.
Yeah.
Should we move on to the ag parcel, that triangle sticking out, Allie, so we can talk about that while we're here?
Which one are you going to, Lauren?
This little triangle you pointed out, Jeff, the hash marks.
Yeah, okay, I see where you're at.
So is it the consensus of the group that on the east side of Taylor Pond, that wouldn't be in high density? Probably when we get doing the medium density, that might be a good target for it. And then in the south end where the overlay is, that would not be in high density, but medium density when we get around to naming it. And then we'll further refine it, as Dana suggested, perhaps as we deal with the roads. Sam?
Yes, sir. I just have a quick comment. I know I haven't been involved in this process and I'm new, but I think I hear a lot of talk about high density, high growth. Growth areas are also where you're going to see new public investment, where the most amount of change is going to occur. And it appears this area is quite large, and I'm assuming most of it was determined by public water and sewer, where public water and sewer is. And in some cases, it makes a lot of sense to see growth there. You know, you could have sidewalks, street lighting, new road improvements, high density, apartment buildings, mixed use housing. But in other places, like talking about before around Taylor Pond and the ag zones, maybe it doesn't make sense, even though there is sewer and water there. So I guess my comment is growth is it can be a broad term. It can be where you want to see sidewalks, street trees, lighting, road improvements, and the state has new legislation that's about to pass about how you can have multiple dwellings on a lot in a growth area and 5,000 square foot lots. So that's could change the scope of this, and having such a large area. I guess my thought is there might be places that maybe don't make sense in the red right now. And sorry to interject again, like I'm new. If I'm out of line, let me know. But it's just a general thought and something to consider going forward.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sam. We appreciate your input and your comments. Don't hesitate to share your ideas. Bruce?
I guess I'm going to agree a little bit with her, especially where it comes from on the Hotel Road, where we have Old Carriage Estates, and that area moving toward Minot Avenue. From Old Carriage Estates to Minot Avenue, we have sizable pieces of land there. I would hate to not include that in the high growth area.
Yeah, That's an interesting point. Yeah, the condominiums on the east side and west side of the hotel road. Mm.
So those would still be in the high growth zone with the change we just made for Taylor Pond.
No, not necessarily Stevens.
I think where we ended up was, we'll adjust for the watershed and make a bunch of these other adjustments, and then we'll go back and look at this again about, because I think Lauren's point is a good one, which is, well, you might be splitting some neighborhood right down the middle. We can go back and look at those after, but I think the change we've made at this point, that's still in the high growth zone.
Yeah, but your point is well taken. There is identified some area that's fairly well developed. Yeah.
What do we want to do about that ag zone parcel that's in the red?
This is what you, Matt, pointed out, that's National Guard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that. I mean, I was just about to look with the parcels where their parcel ends, but certainly the bigger chunk of the lower part of that triangle is all guard.
I would say we take it out at the growth zone.
The area you were talking about, the Garfield Road, is that? I'm just trying to catch up with your thought here.
Yes, west side of Garfield Road, and
Yeah.
unless there was any compelling reason to think that the National Guard was going to pull out of there, I agree with Tim. Just pull it out.
And ultimately, we have no control of what the National Guard, they try to be good neighbors with the zoning, but ultimately they can build whatever they want, wherever they want.
Dana?
Is that triangle of ag zone, is that all one parcel? Is that all the National Guard land, or are there other parcels in there?
Looks like that's one parcel.
It's two parcels, but it's all guard.
Oh, yeah. Take it out of the high growth, I think, then.
Any disagreement with that idea? All right, let's take that out of the high growth as well.
So I think the next one, if you look on just north of the turnpike along River Road, you're going to find an area that's in the ag zone and is high growth.
You're going,
Yeah, that's Carl Delecto's land. That's actually being used as ag zone right now. I mean, the cows on that all the time.
Yeah, I would propose that we keep that in the
Riverside
high.
Drive.
I would propose we keep that in the high density zone.
show me again on the map what you're talking about.
It's basically, as Dana's pointing out, it's the old Delecto brothers.
Yeah, I know, okay, yeah, I'm very familiar with it. I picked up a lot of hay in those fields. And I got paid a whole Pepsi at the end of the day.
You drive a hard bargain, John.
Yeah, no, geez. About it, yeah. So, what's the suggestion? So catch up on it.
So my suggestion is that while it's in ag zone today, we put that in high density. So because of the area that it's in, the availability of water and sewer, and this is not a forward-looking agricultural area. The current owner does have cows out there, But there's been discussion with other farmers in Auburn, and they don't want anything to do with it. They say this is not a valuable agricultural land, and it's not usable for agriculture. So, you know, doing this won't prevent the current owner from continuing to doing what they're doing. But I think from a long-term planning perspective, this is not good agricultural land, and we should put it in the high-density I-growth zone.
Could do that, I might,
Just going to say the various comp plans have talked about this, at least a couple previous ones have talked about it. I agree with the mayor. I think, you know, it's in an area that's, it's in effect, it's like spot zoning now. It's just this one little patch in the middle of a otherwise high-growth area.
I might also note that should this owner or future owner somehow want to use it for agricultural purposes, there is a tax credit, there's a farming tax program that helps reduce the taxes on that. That might be another alternative as opposed to the zoning piece of it. So your suggestion is to keep it as it is?
Yeah, my suggestion is to keep it as high growth, and if that's the sense of the committee, while we're on this, I would point out that, zoom out just a little bit, put just below 95 on River Road. So go to, move the screen to your left so we can see more to the right. So just to the right of your cursor, keep going. Right down below that parcel, right, you see there's a residential zone here, and there's several lots. Just to move your cursor just to the right. A little more, right. Those parcels right there, I would suggest that we consider putting them in a high growth zone, and if we don't, we can revisit this later as potentially a medium growth zone, because this came before the city council. Rick will remember this. In 2010, this was to be put in a growth zone, and the elderly owner of this came to the comp plan committee and said, I don't want to pay the taxes on this, keep it in an ag zone. So that's why it was maintained in an ag zone. And everything else on that side of the other side of the street, and part of that side of the street below it, is not ag. And so I would, it's outside the 200 feet, but it's very close to water and sewer. And so I think the committee should consider whether that should be in the high-growth, high-density zone, and if not, we can revisit potentially as a medium growth area when we move forward later.
Everybody familiar with where that area is we're talking about?
Yeah, Paul's probably very familiar with this because it came before the
Yeah, there was a
as well.
zoning change asked for, especially for the little parcel that on my map says AG on it, but it's within the middle of that side of the road, the river side of the road. A lot of it was in the flood zone anyway, so it, but that little parcel in there. I agree with Jeff. If you just make it, keep it in there, I think the shoreland zoning stuff's going to take care of it.
Okay. Oh, Allie, there you are.
So just as we're thinking about this area here and these handful of parcels, I do want to just, with the full committee, talk through this larger area that follows that we have in the growth area today that the committee has kind of gone back and forth about. There's not water and sewer today, but there's planned water and sewer kind of between the I-95 interchange and this Washington Street area. today that was in high growth due to its access to kind of major arterials and major roadways, but doesn't have water and sewer, isn't very built out? Is this a larger area, as we're thinking kind of holistically, that should see the highest density, highest investment in the future? Or is this something that should be in the moderate or lower density areas?
Yeah, okay, we'll get to that in just a second. But those lots that we just talked about, we want to tie a string to, come back for something other than an agricultural zone in the future. So we'll come back and make a decision on that, I think, later when we start talking about what other kind of development might go in that area. Okay, now, Ally, you raised a good point about where that fairly large area out there, which some perhaps potential development in the future, and what that we should talk about what that should be. Jeff?
So, Ally, your question is that it's marked in the kind of off red here now, right? And your question is you're looking for confirmation from the committee that it should remain in high density? So I would propose that it should. The city's actively pursuing water and sewer expansion on Vickery, South Main, Broad, Out Hatch. And it's currently the city is seeing that as a potential area for investment and growth in the residential sector. So I would propose we keep it as high density, high growth.
All right, other thoughts about that?
John?
Well, for discussion purposes, I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Just, so Lauren started the first round of discussions with staff on the future land use map. And we're going to be coming, we've got more meetings coming, but
Yeah.
staff would agree with this 100%. I think that, we'll come back with some other recommendations. I think we're talking about like a heat map or something like that as we start looking at areas. Everything that you've covered so far are the things that we've already had that conversation on, but we do see this red needing to shrink some as we talk about impacts on services, those things, but this area, we highly recommend this.
As it shows on the map
As
now.
the mayor recommended.
Yeah, all right. And are there other thoughts about that? Oh, yes.
Yeah, my thought on that is I agree, and I think that, the city has been criticized by some about not making land available, and that's land that's well located, and the fact that it doesn't have water and sewer doesn't take away from the good location that puts less stress on city services than some of the more outlying areas. So it's sort of a smart growth, sort of outer edge of smart growth, planning.
Okay.
I think just to emphasize that, I mean, the whole Reimagine Washington Street and the expansion on Broad out to Hackett, and it makes sense to include that. It's great to hear. I had questions about, should the boundary to the east, which is along 95, be the true boundary, but it sounds like that's a good one to keep in the density zone, so.
All right. I would just add, so we have some conversation about it. I'm not 100% convinced it ought to go that far. I think there should be moved out that road further. Whether it should be all the way down there, the concern I have is that's a long ways. It's going to take a lot of investment to get water and sewer out to that area within a 10-year period. And even over into Washington Street, that whole proposal, that is going to be down the road a long ways. Just finishing their study, deciding on going through design work in the future, access, getting access to the land that they're going to need to change that roadway, getting the land purchased, getting the funding approved for it. I think it's coming. I'm not convinced it's within the 10-year framework. And I think it should be pushed further, because there is developable land, some of which it is. I'll just leave the thought with you. You haven't convinced me 100% that it ought to be that far.
John, can I I agree. I think you're not going to see it in 10, but I think as we look at future land use maps, this should be beyond the 10 years. This is something that we've seen that in our past future land use maps. We haven't attained those since you can go back to Rick's first one, which was, I don't know, Rick, what, 1910? So, but I think that we have, we've seen that, but I think that identifying is good, because when we start looking at investments, we have to be looking at this. What are we looking at 20 years? Where are we at? And so it's got to go beyond the 10. I understand, because there's areas that, as staff, we're really concerned about some of this, because this is a lot, this is more red than we had hoped to see. I guess I should say that. So you get a little preview on where staff is on some of this, but only because there's a lot of area here that when we think about service coverage, there's some impacts, right? And so, but we also know that it's future. It's how we build in and what are those changes. And so, so I think more will come from that, but we're not too concerned with this. And I think that the fire department, public works, they're running numbers now as far as what does this look like for some future costs? Yeah. What does this look like for some future response times, especially for the fire department? So they're going to be working with our GIS consultant to talk about we've done some response times already with fire. We're going to include this in there as we start having more of those conversations. And I think, Lauren, we're probably coming back at some point with staff discussion and give you some of our feedback on those. But right now, we're pretty comfortable with that.
Yeah. Okay. Adam?
Will that feedback sort of include which areas you're suggesting no longer be red?
Yeah, the first one was the one you already just took care of on Taylor Pond. So, and then the other one was the one out on Route 4. And so I think we'll probably have some other recommendations on the Route 4 one. But yeah, the ones that you're hitting are the ones we've already had that conversation on.
Jane?
So I'm just going to say that when I saw the red, I was really shocked. And I'm going to recuse myself from the conversation because I'm so deeply attached to those parcels of land and how beautiful they are and how much they are for me, rural, beautiful Auburn. And there are several farms out there and a really wonderful Frisbee golf area. So I think, and you can probably hear I'm kind of emotional about it, but I was surprised to see how much red there was until I read that there was some kind of planning for the future, but I was immediately wondering what the timescale was. Yeah. So it's helpful to hear a little conversation about the timescale, but I'm also mindful of what Sam said, and I'm still trying to wrap my mind around how all of this works. But if we make all that red, does that sort of set off a chain of events that can overtake some of the goals that we've heard and desires that we've heard from people in the public process?
Jane,
Anyway.
go ahead.
Jeff?
Yeah, so
I will say, just ride your bike out there some afternoon when the balloons are landing out there. I'll be really. I hope I won't be around when it's developed.
Jeff?
So a couple of comments. If you remove this area that we're talking about, there's almost no expansion of the red since the 2010 comp plan. This growth area is almost exactly the same. It's very little different. So this is not a huge increase in the growth area other than this area that we're talking about out in New Auburn. So the other thing I would say about this, one of the things we need to think about, like in this area, is two things I would say. One, if it's not in the high growth area, you're not going to get the investment. right? So we're not fully in control of how someone wants to invest. So there are people today that would develop additional housing out there, but for the fact there's no water and sewer. There's developers that own the land already that would build residential housing. What land use category we apply to these places will be important. So it's very unlikely that if you're out at, Broad and Hackett, or you're out at Vickery in South Maine, that, to John's earlier point, that the high density, the land use category that's applied to that area is going to look the same as some other, more downtown locations. But we need, if we want to have the potential for additional residential housing and small businesses, we have to identify these areas, because if they're not in the comp plan, the investors look at that and they'll just go right on by. They'll just go someplace else, because they'll say, well, you can't do this in those areas, which is what led to this whole discussion that's been going on in the city for quite some time now, and pursuit of funding for some of this water and sewer expansion to be able to do that in this area.
I'll just add my final comment. My concern is not the ultimate direction where you're going. My concern is that you may inadvertently be undermining what you ultimately want to do. Because if this is, depending on how it gets, once this is high density, it doesn't match up with the current zoning. That's going to have to be changed. And in this area, if you don't have water and sewer services within this 10-year period, then you're going to have a different kind of development out there rather than the more high density that you might like to see and it might be desirable to have in those areas. Because you're going to have to account for how you're going to provide water and sewer into those developments. So they're not going to be as, it can't be as dense as it would otherwise be. My mind is open. I just don't want us to inadvertently undermine our own efforts by not having the infrastructure within a reasonable amount of 10-year time to meet the goal you're all talking about. So somebody's got to raise some questions, and I'm ready to be convinced. So I'd say, unless there's some more questions about this, we'll leave it as it is for the time being. Okay? Other areas?
I have one additional one. It's kind of a different discussion, but if you go, this is on where West Hardscrabble comes out. So there's an area that borders the city line that on the Auburn side and on the Poland side is all industrial zoning at the present time, except for the ag piece where the current dairy farm is. So Lauren, you know where I'm talking about? So here's the, so this is it right here. So here's the question that I would raise. From a long-term planning perspective, this piece does not fit in with anything else that's around that, not only on the Auburn side, on the Poland side of the line. However, we have one of the two active dairy farms in Auburn that if we just went down the road on this process and said, this is high growth because we want, ultimately it would be industrial zone, you'll put them out of business. So I think what the comp plan committee should consider is whether, from a long-term perspective, this should remain ag zone. And if it isn't, and it should be in the high growth zone and ultimately end up industrial, then we should explore the Title VII provisions that John referenced earlier that require municipal adoption so that even if you're not in the ag zone, the owner, if they're engaging in agricultural activities, can get the same benefits as if you're in our ag zone that would support their ongoing operations. So I think this is an area for us to discuss and decide whether we leave it like it is or whether it should be changed. But if it should be changed, I would propose that we should think about tying it to a Title VII provision so that the current agricultural activity could be ongoing as long as they want to do that.
Yeah.
So just looking at the parcels in that space, it seems to me that it's likely ag zone land just because there's really big parcels there. And I think that the Little Androscoggin overlaps a small piece of the parcel. And so going with the logic that we saw in North Auburn around the stream and that being in the ag zone, I suspect that's why this would be there. I think maybe a better use of that would be to put some protection on the Little Androscoggin, but to find another type of way to zone the remainder of that land. So I don't know if the strip should just be on the watershed of the Little Androscoggin, but I think I agree with Jeff on that one.
Additional comments on this area? Adam?
I'm looking on this map, and it's already in limited growth right now, right?
Yes, yeah.
Right, it's currently ag zone, so with the rule set that we asked Ally and Lauren to use when they produced this, it's outside the high growth zone now because it's currently ag. It was excluded, all the rest of the area around this was industrial from the 2010 comp plan on. This was excluded because there was an active dairy farm there. And I think that's a valuable asset. And I don't think we want to stop that, but I don't know if from long-term planning, leaving it as ag is the thing to do. But if we're not going to, we need to explore recommendations to adopt Title VII so that, because if we change this and went through rezoning, the second the zoning changed, they'd have to shut down because they couldn't afford the taxes that would be applied, right? But Title VII would allow them to maintain the advantageous tax that they have because it's an agricultural activity.
I think for the sake of this discussion, we can hold off on making any determinations right now and have a discussion with city staff and probably at the next meeting as well when we talk about land use categories. It's a little, I think since it's in medium growth right now, limited growth, we're just focusing on the high growth, high density areas. And so I think we can come back to this one if that's all right, just because we have limited
Well,
time.
the reason I raised it is I think this should be industrial. I think ultimately this should be industrial zoning because everything else is around it long term. And we've already identified all the other industrial zones as being in the high growth area, which is why I raised it for this point today.
Oh, I see. You want to change it into high growth, high density from yellow to red.
Yeah, my thought, I mean, I want to see what everybody else thinks, but I think, to me, it makes sense that this would be in the high growth and ultimately would end up in industrial. But I think we would have to caveat that with the city would have to adopt the Title VII provisions so that this dairy farm could continue to operate as they do as long as they want to do that.
Adam?
I guess hearing city staff's reluctance with the current red that we have, I'm somewhat reluctant of adding more red at this point. It's sort of my immediate reaction.
Phil?
So this is one that staff actually recommended in our first meeting. So I hear what you're saying, Ed, but this, I think to the mayor's point about the industrial all around this, I think with the Title VII provision, I think that it provides a good option, but we see this also as tying into some of that other development that's in that area regarding industrial, this one actually does align well.
Make it red.
Sending mixed messages right
It's challenging, right? Because there's so many different uses as we go through, but I think, but there are these carve-outs, so I appreciate I think that our concern when we talked about all the, was just about all the changes regarding what that future could look like, which is different than what probably the future land use looked like in 2010 when that was adopted. Now, when you look at some of the changes in the law, that's where it gives us the concern. Not that it's now in a growth area, but now that it's in that high-density growth area, there's a little bit of pause. But this one makes sense.
I'm happy to make it that way and make the provision. It does make sense.
Is it the pleasure of the committee to make a recommendation at this point for changing that to a high density, ultimately industrial? So we direct it to be, put it in red. Okay?
So I think I'm itching to ask you guys this question. And it's to Jane's point, so I'm switching gears here a little bit, talking about what we've heard in community engagement from the community and also from city staff in terms of services provided and sustainably growing over time. And to Sam's point about growth isn't just residential growth, it's where we want to put other types of growth, whether that's commercial and so on. And so the question that I want to ask of the committee is, when you're looking at how it is quite a large area of red, given the density requirements from the state in 1829. 1829 also talks about if you're in a growth area or an area served by water and sewer, you allow residential uses, you have to allow, I'm going to say 3 to 4 units. Then there's the density question, whether you're in your high growth, high density, and water and sewer. So I say that because you can have an area that's served by public water and sewer. We would still have to allow at a minimum 3 to 4 units if it's in a residential district. So if you were to shrink this red, because is all of Auburn, all of this red that you have, subject to where you want to see the highest growth, the highest density in all of the forms, residential, commercial, and so on. If you maybe think about nodes of growth, where there's areas of the city where, the mall area, our downtown, down by the industrial sectors, could that be our high density, high growth? And then in those in-betweens, we have the medium growth, medium density. That's not to say we won't be able to, there's no residential growth happening, there'll still be growth. At a minimum, we have to allow 3 to 4 units because it has public water and sewer. You're just adjusting the density at which that growth is at a minimum. So that's the question I want to ask the committee is, and city staff discussed this as well, when thinking about, do we want the growth rate to shrink? Do we want it to be greater? It's not necessarily a bigger or smaller, it's where that red is, and it might end up being smaller, but it's more located in a certain area but it's not the whole swath of the city as it is now. But if the committee thinks it should be, as it is, but from city staff perspective, we want the committee to have that discussion of, should this entire area be subject to high density, high growth at a minimum?
So you're suggesting maybe there might be an intermediate growth area there.
So some areas, there might be more yellow. So the medium growth, medium density. That's not saying you're shutting off development of housing. You might be saying that's not where we want really high density of growth.
Yeah.
I would say no. I think it'd be a huge error for us to shrink this red, because when you get into medium growth, you're talking about some very limited opportunities. I think that the committee will have enough latitude in the definition of the land use categories within the red. I don't think we should be painting a picture that says this whole red is going to have, you know, block after block of 10-story apartment buildings, because, you know, what we think of is a lot of residential areas today in Auburn fit within this definition of high growth. I think some things we have today we wouldn't be able to do if we switch these over to low and medium growth areas. So I would not be in favor of just arbitrarily shrinking this because we think the red is too big, because I think we're limiting a lot of opportunities for the city.
I wouldn't say it would be arbitrarily shrinking it. It would be looking at, so if we're looking at our building footprint right now, potentially saying we want our building footprint of impervious surface to be larger, to be bigger. And so it wouldn't be arbitrary to be saying, where do we want to really focus? It'd be a decision amongst the committee, and it would actually lead into our land use categories discussion of, does it make sense to have high density, high growth in some of those areas where we don't have that type of growth right now? Do we want that in 10 years? It's not arbitrary in the sense of it's too big, we need to shrink it. It's, do we want it to be where all of this is where we're focusing our resources? That's the question.
Those are good points. I think I saw there was some desire on the committee to include it in the red section, high density. Committee still comfortable going that way? Yeah.
Like, I can see both sides of this argument right now. That's the tough part, because I definitely understand that there is a lot of red there, but I don't, to the mayor's point, I don't want things removed from the red because we're afraid of impacting the nature of a residential development that has only single-family houses, and we don't want anything other than single-family houses there. I don't want something removed from red because we fear having multifamily houses, apartments in a place where there is other type of single-family residential development. So that I get that we may want to limit the red, but I don't want that to be the basis for limiting the red. If I can express sort of like a policy version of it.
Okay. What I might suggest is, we're not at the end. So maybe for this point, seems to be a general consensus to put it in red, but reserve the opportunity when we look at it again to see if you're still comfortable with that. Is that okay with the group? Okay, then we'll do it that way. Oh, Jeff.
Yeah, I have several other areas I mapped on the, marked on the maps here that I think that the committee should consider that are not currently in red, but potentially we might want to do that. So Ally, if you can go down to where Washington Street Route 100 comes to the Auburn New Gloucester line below the turnpike, right? Just go up just a minute. So that, go up a little more. Other way, sorry, make the map go up. So this area here is on Washington Street, below the just below the turnpike. The part that's not in the ag zone, the hash mark on the left, is Eastman Lane, Poland Spring Road, and Moose Brook and whatnot's on the right. So I think, I think it was Lauren that pointed this out a couple minutes ago. I think that as we work through this, because of the characteristics of the area, places like downtown, the mall area, and I think exit 75 lend themselves for opportunities for high growth, high development. This area is immediately adjacent to the turnpike. It's very close by rail. It's very close by the airport. It's on one of the busiest through thoroughfares in the city. So I think we should consider both sides of Washington Street there. As you can see, it's all surrounded by water and sewer now, as to whether north of the Royal River, which sort of cuts from the point of the ag zone to the point of that red, along Washington Street, whether that should be in high density, high growth, and then potentially the other side of the road as well.
Where the hash marks are, is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, so the two pieces, if you look, can you point to where the Royal River is, Ally? Go to the left, right there. So north of the Royal River, along where water and sewer is today, that kind of rectangular block along Washington Street. So once you go by the turnpike today, you know, if people know where you turn to go up Poland Spring Road, you go down a little further, there's Eastman Lane on the right. This would be to the left, going down towards the New Gloucester line. This is just below the turnpike. So that rectangular block, I think, would be one question. And the other question would be, what's across the street, which is surrounded by water and sewer? It doesn't have it today, but it's surrounded. You know, there's water and sewer nearby there. And part of the reason I raise this is that if we're looking at the city being able to take advantage of the opportunities for commuters, it's only going to be south of the city center, right? We're not going to get people that are gonna move up where Rick is, because it takes as long to drive from Rick's house to the turnpike as it does from the turnpike to Portland. So all the rest of Washington Street is, you know, around that's all water and sewer. It's close to the turnpike, and I think we should consider this as inclusion because of the opportunities it provides for development that's likely to take place along Washington Street anyways, and having that continue south towards the New Gloucester line.
So that dividing line with the
That's
hash marks
Washington
are, that's
Street.
Washington Street. So are you talking about both sides of that?
Well, I think it's two separate questions because it's kind of different characteristics. The right-hand side where the ag zone's a lot of open land, there's a few houses in there. The left side's more built up. I mean, you could consider it as one question or two questions, but, you know, it's an area that's sort of surrounded by water and sewer access and close to the turnpike.
Yeah, so I guess I'm just trying to visualize it a little bit. Right now, that's zoned urban, rural residential. Like conceptually in my mind, like what's the density that you think might be appropriate there?
Well, I think along Washington Street, potentially multi-families, you know, this is all, well, it's rural residential on one side, so it's a minimum of 1 acre lots, and on the other side's ag zone, so depending on if it's pre-existing or not, it's a 10-acre lot, and it has to be an accessory use to an agriculture. So ultimately, there's no residential development that's gonna happen on the east side there of Washington Street, but it seems like a mixed use. There's already above that starting in some mixed use businesses, and I think there's potential there for residential, more high density residential development.
It's interesting.
So why don't we take it into two questions? So let's look at the side to the west that's white, has some housing development in there. Is that rectangle an area that should be included in high density? I think that's the question. currently no water and sewer there, but
I do think it's an interesting thought, and I do wonder if there's more likelihood of having development there than up closer to the river road. I don't know, just because of the proximity to the turnpike and people that are interested in, being closer to Portland, but are priced out of New Gloucester.
yeah.
So until we put water and sewer there, I mean, the state would require us to have, what, a half an acre lot per dwelling unit. So, I mean, what we're looking at right now is the potential, without running pipe, that we could double the density there.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Dana. And what we would be saying is that from a planning perspective, it would be an area for potential water and sewer expansion, whether a developer does that or the government does that. I mean, one of the active discussions with the Housing and Economic Development Committee that we're having is that, as Adam knows from being in the legislature, there's a lot of interest in housing development, but part of the problem is that there's very limited mechanisms. There's little to no ability for the water or sewer district to expand their distribution network on ratepayer dollars. And the legislature, I think, perhaps inadvertently, has cut off impact fees. So really, you're at a point where some governmental entity has to bond this, or a developer says, okay, incrementally, I'm going to build, on the top part of the rectangle, and I'm going to run the water and sewer down there, because in a business case, I have that make sense. In the current situation, no one would consider doing that, because you couldn't build something like on Spring Street, right, where you've got some businesses on the bottom and a bunch of, apartments on the top.
Other thoughts? So how do you feel? You want to put that rectangle, that white rectangle, into high density?
I think I could support that. The other side of the road, I'd really want to know a little bit more about the Royal River watershed and the effects associated with that before going forward with a full recommendation on that.
Yeah, I think I agree with Dennis. If that became a priority to develop into higher density, I mean, you're talking about a bunch of infrastructure that need to be added to that. But as it stands, I think it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, just so people visualize this, that weird piece that comes down there is where Moore and Brick is. So there's already industrial right up. I agree that we should think about protection of the Royal River, which is, my suggestion is it would have to be north of that. But there's industrial right behind there now.
So let's keep focusing on the white triangle, and we'll talk about the other one in a minute here. Bruce?
At what point, when we do these types of expansions, making the area so large, do we get diminishing return on the expansion that we're doing on, on Broad Street and Vickery Road and, South Witham Road and that area there? So if we start moving it all the way out there, our developer's going to say, well, it's going to be a lot less expensive for me to build out of Washington Street as far as developing that land than it will be in Broad Street. Taking, and making it, now you can build out from the edges of our city. So I guess I'm not 100% in favor of this.
Yes, I understand your point, Bruce. I would rather think of it that what we're going to end up with is multiple cores within the high-density, high-growth zone. And I don't think the way this works is you put a pin on the map and say that's the core, and everything builds out from that. Because, you know, we have currently of downtown, we haven't talked a lot about this, but we have the mall area, and the mall isn't going to get anyone any place, and that's ripe for redevelopment. And I think an appropriate development there would be its own core, right? It is mixed use with residential, with small businesses and things in that area. So I think part of this is going to get to the land use categories, because I think what you might say would be acceptable to build off Washington Street, lots that abut Washington Street, might be different than what you would say, well, this is what we want to have coming out Broad Street. So I'm not sure that it would be the exact same opportunity. I think they might be opportunities that serve people that are looking for different things, because I think, you know, the type of residential development on Broad or South Main wouldn't be what you might be looking for something adjacent to the Turnpike exit.
Phil, I want to go to you. Municipal service impact. Have the guys talked about that? I mean, we're right out to the end of the boundary line of the.
Yeah, actually, we
south-
started talking about this one briefly. We started talking about, the mayor actually pointed out Moose Brook and that area. And I think, to Bruce's point, I think that what the mayor was referring to is you're going to have, those are two very different development demands, right? So when we look at Vickery, I think that the customer base for that Vickery, Broad Street area is going to be very different than what the customer demand is going to be for access to that turnpike to go south. And so, so we did have some conversations. I don't think we talked about the triangle, did we? Across Washington Street on the other side. The one that we're talking about right now, the one, not Moose Brook, but on the other side.
This one over
Yeah.
Or we did talk, if you go north alley.
Yeah, we talked here, right?
This one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I don't think we did down here. So I think I agree, I hear what Bruce is saying, but I think we have two very different development demands. And so having the different points of core makes sense, because we're gonna see that based on what the demand for development will be pushing. And so you're gonna see Carrier Court as multiple, like, single family to, not Carrier Court, I'm sorry, Vickery. You're gonna see, that development build out potentially with water and sewer. That's going to be some multi-units, and not necessarily the mixed use that I think that we've identified in this area to be really a high demand.
Let me just follow up for a second, then I can. So you're pushing the municipal, making this high-density development, hopefully with some water and sewer. You're pushing a municipal services impact all the way to the end of the boundary line. But given the nature of where this is, where the turnpike is and that kind of thing, you're comfortable it fits in with the impact on municipal services?
Yeah, we've run quite a few numbers when it pertains to some of the different developments already occurred. We talked about Presidential Way, Mountain View. There's some developments that have occurred out there. We've pulled the service call volumes for those areas to see what has the impact been, and it's been little to none. And I think separate from any school impact. So we're pulling police, fire services, and taking a look at those. We had decent conversation about some of these developments on do we tweak the language as it pertains to when do we have to adopt that road, right? Because that's a bigger conversation about how do we control cost. because that will do it. If we really change that language, so we're just not accepting everything because they were able to build it to a certain criteria. Can we keep it just shy of that? And so you can build it, but yet we never have to adopt it. And so that's what we would like to see. That's where we see a high demand for costs. But when we look at that type of development growth, based on what we've seen so far in these clusters, we're not seeing a high demand for police and fire services that's tipping any need to have to put any expanded fire station or anything. We're just not seeing it.
No.
And so I think we're running some more. I think we're going to be looking at some more numbers because we want to make sure we're providing you some of that as you make some of these decisions. But we feel really comfortable with this this area right here.
All right. Dana?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just touched on half of what I wanted to talk about, so thanks for the discussion on city services. I guess anytime that I think about increasing the density of an area, my thinking goes towards, for lack of a better term, sprawl, and not necessarily sprawl in housing, but sprawl in how far away people are going to have to be from services as well as food, other types of commercial activity that they might need inside of those new houses. And so if we're increasing density in a place that doesn't previously have an increased density, I think we just need to take that in mind and to allow for some sort of mixed use in those areas, just so that we're not creating a food desert or those types of things for those new people that are going to be living there. So I think that's just something that we'd have to keep in mind as we go into further discussions about future land use.
Okay. I'm mindful that we're a little bit after 8 o'clock here. Is it the consensus of the group at this point that white triangle should be in high density? Anybody adamantly objecting? Or no? Put some red in there.
Yeah, traffic.
Now, I want to ask you, we talked a little bit to the striped area to the south. Do you want to continue that conversation because we started it? Or do you want to add that to our conversation the next time we talk about this?
I agree with Dennis's comment that I'd like to have more information about the watershed and other things.
Okay.
So another date would be best.
Okay, why don't we do that then? So, we are about 8:10, or 8:10, yeah. We did quite a bit, so I'm pleased with that in the high density. And we'll come back again and do some more work on this, probably, in January, no later than our January meeting. Wanted to talk about a couple of, so I want to move on from there. I spoke to you before about the subcommittee work and the review by the staff of our policies and actions. We're going to update that to where we are with the staff input and what the committee had input, but we'd like to come back and have the subcommittees review that again. And so I'm looking for days that we could have the two subcommittees meet, so 2 days. And taking a look at the calendar to try to do it before our next full committee meeting, I'm looking at the week of the 12th in specific, looking at dates that the rooms are available, January 12th, 14th, and 15th. Picking 2 of those out of that 3. Are there any of those days that some of you want to protect and not have on those days? This, of course, would be an evening meeting. January 12th, 14th, and the 15th. Yeah? Whoop. Oh, Phil?
I think Phil and I had a discussion earlier today about some activities on the 12th, so we could do it across the hall if that room's open. If not, this room won't be available on the 12th.
We need the community room, I think.
Yeah, if the community's room's available on the 12th, this other activity that we discussed in a meeting earlier today, could take place across the hall. If not, it'll have to be in here, if that room's already booked on the night of the 12th.
So are people available on the 14th and 15th? Oh, Adam says no.
Well,
Yep, yeah.
don't plan around my schedule because session is starting
Oh.
in January, and
We'll
I
miss
know
you.
that I have committee the 13th, 14th, and 15th, so I was partial to the 12th being one of the days because I am available that day for certain, but again, don't plan around me.
We're talking about one subcommittee one night.
Yes,
the other
yes.
another day.
One subcommittee, one night.
Can we do a doodle poll?
Yeah.
I mean, just that, because that way you can be looking at it based on what committee the people are on.
Yeah, all right, why don't we send it out? You can look at your calendars, let's see where the most people are available to attend.
And that'll give Lauren an opportunity to validate in the morning about this room. Phil can fill you in on what's going on, and you can include that in the poll. We'll know if the 12th's available or not in the morning.
Okay. Is there anything else the committee wants to bring up? Okay, so our next full meeting is January 27th here, fourth Tuesday, excuse me, in this room. And in between, there's going to be a bunch of work going on. And Lauren's a trooper, even though she's on 2 crutches, he's still going.
I'll have nothing better to do but this, so.
Well,
Thanks,
I'm
Tim.
somewhat.
Phil, we're going to have to work on that, you know, there's
Yeah.
work-life balance kind of thing, or
Not anymore.
She's fine, she's fine.
Okay, with that.
It's PT and future land use, that's all I'm doing.
Noting the time, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
second.
Moved and seconded, all those in favor. Thank you all for your time and your input, been productive.
I think